What exactly is racism? And is it the same as racial discrimination as defined by law? Have you ever experienced racism or discrimination, but were not sure how to explain it? And when you actually tried to explain it, you were gaslit into thinking that it didn't happen or it was just a misunderstanding? Then this video is for you. Hi, I'm Christina Osure, author of How to Deal with Racist Workmates. I also run the masterclass on how to handle workplace racism and offer tailored workshops and training programs to various bodies and associations. Okay, let's get started. In this video, we'll answer the questions: what is racism? What is discrimination? And more specifically, racial discrimination, and how are they different from each other? So, what is racism? Cambridge Dictionary defines it as policies, behaviors, rules that result in a continued unfair advantage to some people and unfair or harmful treatment of others based on race. It is also harmful or unfair things that people say, do, or think based on the belief that their own race makes them good, more intelligent, moral than people of other races. For example, a statement like people from insert race here, so people from this race are lazy, that's a racist statement. Or if someone assumes there's a language barrier purely because someone is from a different race, then that's a racist thought. So, how does racism differ from discrimination? To answer this question, let's look at the definition of discrimination. Amnesty International defines discrimination as occurring when a person is unable to enjoy his or her human rights or other legal rights on an equal basis with others because of an unjustified distinction made in policy, law, or treatment. In other words, where racism can remain a thought, discrimination occurs when the individual acts on the thought, or it could be the institution. So the institution acts on the thought. So let's use the earlier example. Thinking someone is lazy just because of their race is a racist thought. Now, if you, however, don't act on the thought, it's not discrimination. But if you act on the thought, let's say you start scrutinizing their work more, you start putting them under the microscope, looking at how they're spending their time, start monitoring their minute by minute performance, then it becomes discrimination. The other example we looked at is assuming there's a language barrier purely because someone is from a different race. Now, if you act on that thought, you might say, change the way you allocate work, and that disadvantages the person. Therefore, it's no longer just racism, it's actually discrimination because the person cannot enjoy their legal rights on an equal basis with the rest of the team. Their employment is adversely impacted and they are unable to enjoy their full benefits, since there's been an unjustified distinction made in the way they are treated compared to members of other races. So that's discrimination. All right, now that I think we know what's the difference between racism and discrimination, there are different ways that you can actually discriminate on an employee. You could discriminate on them based on their age, it could be based on their gender, and there are other factors as well. So for this video, we are focusing on discriminating based on race, so racial discrimination. So what exactly is the legal definition of racial discrimination? Article 19 of the United Nations defines racial discrimination to mean that the discriminatory behavior is based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. So I'll repeat those again. It's based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. Let's look at an example of each briefly. The first one, race. Race focuses on broadly socially constructed categories, and I'm calling them socially constructed because research showed clearly that there's really no difference in the races. It's just something that we've created from a social point of view. But when you look at the DNA, there's really no difference in what we call different races. 99.999% is similar. If you're discriminating against race, it could be, for example, a hiring manager. They refuse to consider anybody from a certain race, so let's say the black race, simply because of their own stereotypes. So the person might have all the qualifications they need, they might have all the experience that's wanted, but they simply refuse to hire anybody from that particular race. So that's an example of discriminating on the basis of race. Now, discrimination based on color can be within even the same racial group, and it could be to do with the skin tone. So it could be outside the racial group, but also within racial group. It might be someone who's lighter skin toned might be preferred, say, to someone who's darker skin toned. It could be that there's a promotion, both candidates are equally qualified, but you decide to give the candidate who's of a lighter skin tone. And it's normally referred to as colorism. That's a type of racial discrimination as well, from a legal perspective. So race and color normally intersect, but they differ slightly because one could be based on the skin tone as opposed to just the race. Now, the next one is descent. Number 3 is descent. Descent refers to the ancestry of the person or their lineage. It could be caste-based, for example, that someone might refuse to promote somebody because they are from what they consider to be a lower caste. For example, someone refuses to work with someone. So let's say a manager refuses to work with an employee from a South Asian background, let's say, because of what caste class they belong to. Despite the person being qualified, despite the person being okay in terms of performance, they simply refuse to work with them because in their mind they feel like they're from a different caste and so they will not mingle. That's discrimination, racial discrimination. In other words, descent is more about familial status or the inherited background, the origin. The next one is nationality. The person discriminating focuses more on the person's country of origin or their citizenship status, and therefore might discriminate against people who are non-nationals. For example, it could be that they prefer to employ people, say, from Western countries compared to equally qualified people from, say, African or Asian nations. And in that instance, they'll probably cite something like, oh, you're not a good cultural fit. That could be a sign of racial discrimination with a focus on nationality. And finally, ethnicity. Now, ethnicity focuses more on the person's language or traditions or cultural heritage or history as opposed to just physical traits or nationality. For example, a manager might discriminate on an employee, refuse to invite them to functions simply because they are, say, Kurdish, even though they share the same nationality as other colleagues. That's racial discrimination based on the ethnicity of the person. All these fall under the umbrella of racial discrimination. Hopefully, you now have a better understanding of what is racism and when it becomes racial discrimination. When it remains a thought, it's racism. It's prejudicial views, but it's racism. But when you act on it and it harms the individual or it disadvantages the individual, denies them some of their rights, denies them from enjoying equal opportunities with other people, then it becomes discrimination. And you should be in a better position to confirm if the discrimination is racial based on the 5 different attributes we've covered: race, color, descent, nationality, and ethnicity. For more specific determination, if your work situation can satisfy the definition of discrimination, check out the free questionnaire on our website using the link provided below in the description, or you can browse the website for more resources. Happy browsing and see you in the next one.